Hello to everybody. My name is Markus Galla. I'm a comic ambassador from Germany. And this is Susanne Buddenberg and Thomas Henseler, two comic artists from Germany who made a lot of comics about East Germany, East Berlin and the GDR. And your comics can be sold on the table in the, you know what kind of room? But Timo will know it. Yeah. He will show it later to you. Nice to meet you at the Tampere Kuplii. Like it so far?
Well, it's very nice, and we also had a very warm welcome here. Thanks to Nina and Kirsti as well. So it's nice. Yeah. Robin also wanted to tell something. It's very big, and you meet a lot of local artists and also a lot of cosplay players, and very nice to see the different costumes. Well, I like it here.
Okay, you too, Susanne, you like it too?
Yes, we had a nice host today, and we saw a lot of different independent comic makers, and yeah, I had a little chat, and yes, and we saw Tampere. That was quite nice. We went to the tower.
Nesin Öla.
And yes, we saw the two lakes, the big one.
Nesin Järvi.
And the small one.
Okay, thank you, Susanne and Thomas. What do the Finns and Finnish comics fans have to know about you? Who are you? Why are you comic artists?
Well, I think that's a question you have to ask the Finnish people. But what we are doing now for like 10 years is telling stories about the GDR and the German Wall. And so we both come from West Germany, but we kind of had to do a lot of research about that topic because we didn't know anything at all about it. The thing is, we live quite a long time now in Berlin and very close to the former border. So it was like every stone you saw, you walked on, it was like a historical ground. And so this interested us, and so we decided to do comics about that topic.
And how did you decide to make comics?
Oh, that was quite easy. Thomas makes comics since he is 3 years old, as Robin is now, and so he never did something else.
So it's a little bit boring, but you know, you get a kind of expertise in that, and I draw in elementary school, and when you don't get any marks, and so this went on later on. I also grew up with Donald Duck, and I still like to read it, and especially the Italian comic artists from the Italian magazine Topolino, and I like the dynamics and the style, and it's still fun to read for me. And yes.
Yeah, and recently it's allowed to draw in school during lessons. It's very popular, and it's yeah, they have a name for it. It's called sketchnoting.
It's the same in English.
And it's quite nice because you can draw and listen, and you are able to remember it very well because it's visual.
Does anybody in the audience know it, sketch notes? If yes, please put up your arm. Someone out there is putting up his arm. But I suppose she's not listening. So it's very interesting because it's like a new movement going on. And in Berlin, we also got some recent meetings, like every 2 months, and it's called VisThink, like visual thinking. And so it's very nice, and it's very good to memorize things. When you're having a lecture, for example, at school, you try to capture the essentials by words and pictures. And so normally when you're writing a lecture or you make notes, look at it like 2 weeks after you don't know what it is about at all. But when you're looking at your sketch notes, the interesting thing is all the topics are there in an instant. So it's very good for getting clever more and more, and it's nice in training your listening capacities and capabilities, and also your drawing skills. Of course, you can't be too detailed. You have to focus on very simple figures. And if you're doing it live, it's called graphic recording. You're doing like live sketches when someone is talking, like in discussions, or even here in an interview, one could graphic record this. So this might be interesting, especially to combine the two scenes, the comic scene and the sketch note and graphic recording scenes. It's getting bigger and bigger.
And you see it in your works, in your comic books. It is combined
in my personal.
In your personal comic books.
Well, of course, especially in the new one, I tried a little bit to integrate it, not only making like a film in book, but also to be more graphic and use a little bit more symbols in that. So this, I think it could be a way to go.
And when will it be edited, this new comic?
Hopefully this year.
2019. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we're still working on it, and if you want, we'll be doing a workshop later on at 3 o'clock, 3 to 4, and there we'll be showing some new and fresh material which hasn't been shown yet.
Okay. Mm-hmm. You tell us something about Italian and Japanese comic artists. Are these your role models?
Thomas's, yes.
And you? Do you have own role models,
yes,
Susanne?
I have.
Which one? If you like to answer.
Yes, mine is Bill Watson, and from Calvin and Hobbes. So.
Yes, I think we've got different likes. This also reflects in our working together. That might be perhaps a point you'll be asking us later on. How do you work? And so sometimes it's very complementary. You know, when I like green, Susanne says, no, you know, it should be more red. And so we are kind of arguing a lot, and and trying to compromise sometimes. And so it's also reflecting in the likes of a different comic artist. She is going more to experimental and not so much look at that, and this looks interesting. And probably I'm more in a kind of realistic way. As I mentioned before, I like Joe Sacco a lot. I think he's quite a role model for a lot of artists. But telling realistic stories, but with a very good research, like kind of graphic journalism. So.
Okay. And do you work from home, or do you have an external studio?
No. We are just working from home. This has pros and cons. You don't have a long way to go to a studio. The other thing is you don't get out of your house quite a lot, and that might be some disadvantage then.
Yeah, but recently we are searching for a place to do things we couldn't do at home, to draw bigger things, to use different materials, to work with smaller people, younger people, and if you work with your whole body, painting, you need space, and so we are looking for space.
Okay, if somebody knows someone in Berlin who has the space for these two artists, please hold your hand. Okay, next question. Back to your comics yourself. How did it happen that you discussed East Germany? Do you have relevance or friends there in the time before the review?
Actually, my mother was coming from the GDR. And my grandfather and my grandmother lived in the GDR. So when I was really a little kid, we went there often, and we also made some experiences with the system there, because on the other side of the streets where my grandparents lived, there were some older boys, and we often changed like mosaic comics. It was very popular in the GDR. But next time we went there, I said, well, who's that and that boy? And they told me, well, he's gone. And I so what happened to him? And nobody really wanted to talk about it. But then later on it came out, well, he kind of disappeared and vanished, and probably went over to the other side, escaped. So that this was strange in a way. And another episode I remember, at that time I really liked to copy bills, banknotes from different countries, and so I also liked the GDR money quite a lot, because there were different figures on it, like Karl Marx. We didn't have that in the place I came from, so I put it in my pocket, and while we were going back by train to Western Germany, I showed it happily to my mother. Look, mother, I took some money from the GDR in my pocket. And she said, she came pale white and said, well, you can't do this, because it's smuggling currency from the GDR to West Germany. It's forbidden. So she stood there and said, well, what to do with it? And she put it in a kind of paper handkerchief into the waste bin. and waited a little time, and then she got it out from there and put it back in her pocket. And like 5 minutes later, a soldier came and emptied the waste bins. So it was the better move to do so. That were my experiences I had.
And are you frightened in this time as a kid? Do you recognize it that this was a dangerous situation or a forbidden situation?
Well, I just looked at the face of my mother, and so I recognized, well, so probably it wasn't the best move I did. Mm-hmm.
But anyway, these are nice little stories from Western Germany, childhood. You can't compare it with any experience people have on the other side.
And did you discuss the situations with real GDR people for your comics? Yourself, you, for the comic you made about Berlin, geteilte Stadt or Grenzfall?
But our experience are none.
Less.
Yeah, well, what we did a lot of interviews and. Willst du was sagen? We did a lot of extensive research and interviewed the people in the comic books quite intense. So we made a lot of sessions where we asked them, and this was also a point for us, which was quite important to interview the people, to have direct contact, how they are dealing with different questions, and even in the tone of voice, it gave you some information how to deal with a certain situation. So this was quite important for us.
I can remember a situation with our witness of the time, Peter Grimm. He was telling about a journey he was in China one day, and he was like, oh yeah, and it was pretty easy to look at the people, and he is able to see who is working for the government and who is just
normal people, yeah.
Citizens. So, and I must admit, I couldn't do that.
Okay.
But I think right now we could, because we've got a certain expertise. We always ask them, so if they're kind of secret agents, how do you recognize them? And he said, well, you saw it, and I think one. Lass mich mal. And one thing is, a lot of the people at that time had kind of longer hair and beards as well, and parkas, and they probably looked a little bit like hippies in a way. But these Stasi people had like short hair and like clean coats, and so you just developed a look for it then. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And this was also important to know when you draw these people then.
For sure. Mm-hmm. For your DDR comics, for your GDR comics, for sure. The wall has been history for 30 years now, and you live in the town with the former wall. Mm-hmm. Can you still see where the wall has been built this time?
Yes, well, it's where we live. It's very close to the Bernauer Straße, and you still see a monument of the wall, parts of it. A lot of tourists are there now, and so this is quite present at that part. But it was all around East Berlin. You see sometimes stones on the ground where the wall was, and of course follow the stream of tourists where they're going by bike or so, because I think the wall is quite the main attraction of Berlin. A lot of people are going there because of the wall. But you can't, of course, see now what it there at that time, because it was you were in life danger when you tried to come to the wall and to overcome it. And at the Bernauer Straße, there's still like a kind of excerpt from the time where you see a watchtower and how far the wall was. There was a sandway, so you got the like a museum. You've got the feeling of what it meant to overcome this part. Mm-hmm.
And can you recognize which one is an East Berlin and which one is an West Berlin citizen this time? Is it possible? After all these years? No. Still the same now, after 30 years? Only if it is so. And you are still, do you have friends from East Germany now that you live in Berlin? Or mostly West German, West Berlin citizens?
Berlin is quite international, I would say. And our friends came from all over the world. So in our house we have friends from Japan, and a friend of us, the boyfriend came from Senegal, and yes, but Robin's godfather is from a former East Germany and grew up there.
And he lives now in Berlin?
Yes.
Okay.
With his family, yeah. And Robin's godmother is from Austria, and
so the whole world in one city now.
Yeah.
Kind of. Okay.
So.
Okay. Back to your comics. The next one will be also about East Germany. It will be published this year. Also about the GDR.
Yes, it's autobiographical book with stories, and the name of the author is Claudia Rusch. The funny thing is, it has also been published here in Finland a couple of years ago. I don't remember the correct Finnish title by now, but I think it's like Stasi very low, and so it's a funny book in a way about the GDR, which is quite rare to find. And Claudia tells about her own childhood when she grew up in a dissident household, and she had a lot of famous friends who were against the state, and she tells a different story about that episode, and she was born like 1971, so at the exact time when she finished her school, like the wall fell down. So this was great luck for her, because a lot of people who grew up before in the GDR had a kind of crooked CV where they were forced to do jobs they didn't want to do, and so for her it was perfect then. And she was also a great fan of France and Paris, and to go to Paris. And in the GDR, it was not so easy to learn French or a foreign language like English, for example. For what? Because you couldn't practice it. And so she tells stories about that, and we picked up like half of the chapters and made it into a comic adaptation then.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. Will there be other topics on comics over the GDR? Other topics like West German themes, stories, or is the GDR your main story?
Yeah, often you have comic books about autobiographical stories, and so yeah, probably I should do something called Born in Bünde.
Bünde is in North Westphalia in West Germany.
But it could be a bit boring, and so we stick with more interesting stories.
Yeah, I suppose Born in Duisburg wouldn't be much of a thriller either, and or maybe Born in Moers, as Markus comes from, very close to Duisburg, and well, I think it will remain kind of eternal topic, like fighting against dictatorship or oppressing system. I think it's kind of a universal theme, as you also can see in books and movies. And we've got this special situation in Berlin. I think another thing is, if you're telling about the GDR or about the time where the Nazis ruled Berlin, when you're dealing with a topic like that, I think you also have to bear in mind that the topic makes something with you. So like making comics about the Holocaust may be much more difficult to deal with, because what we tried to survey were in a way happy endings, like when you're going over to the other side and the escaped happened, so it was hilarious for the people who took place in that. And it also reflects on your own mind as well, and so probably we stick more to happy endings then.
Yes, and it's the themes are universal, because it's about refugees.
And the strive for freedom, and the wall is a topic, like not only in Germany, but also in other countries like USA right now, for example. We didn't think of that like 2 years ago, but. So I think that's a situation you always have to deal with, and there are a lot of walls between countries. But I once heard a quotation. It was like this: an enemy isn't a story you haven't heard. It's history, and I think that's quite a good quotation, because in hearing the stories from the other side, like brings down a kind of wall we also have in our mind to learn to know the other people then.
And will you teach with your comics?
Yes.
Yes.
Which was the main target group of your comics?
Well, the main target group, willst du?
Are younger people.
What means younger people? Real kids? 10 years old?
So in Berlin they have, I think it's in the third class, third grade, yeah. The theme, and they're quite familiar with this. In Bavaria, by the way, they don't know nothing, I heard about, because my godchild,
child or friend, you can say.
Lives now in Bavaria, and she told me that in her class no one has an idea about.
Okay.
So I think Bavarian, for example, our target group.
A big target group, for sure.
Well, and of course, if you're born after 1989, and the people are now like 30 years old.
Roundabout.
And you don't have a clue what it is about to grow up in a dictatorship, and where you can't go freely to the wall and make pictures, or you can't be what you want, because at that time the system was very strict. When you were in opposition, you had to do another job or couldn't study at all. So this is quite unimaginable today.
We have this Tunnel 57 book. Formerly it was an exhibition, and we do some workshops with this theme. And in this book we have one perspective, the perspective of Mr. Neumann, and in our workshops we ask the students to draw the perspective of his wife, and they are going around having a walk through the area where it's happened, and afterwards they are drawing it, and because there are different perspectives on it.
Okay. Now a question which was also interested for Finnish. Yes, sorry.
Shall we ask if there are some questions from the public?
Sorry, for sure. If you have any questions to Thomas and Susanne, please. Your chance.
Okay.
There is one question.
Could you? Okay. So one project I mentioned before, it's the book by Claudia Rusch, which hopefully will be published this autumn. So, and we are dealing with it a little bit in the workshop later on. And future projects, what we're also doing is working with kids.
But this is not a comic project, or it's also okay?
Yeah, but we help kids to realize their stories. So.
And this will be also published?
No.
Only for the project, for the kids. Okay, perfect. And now the question from, which was also interesting for the Finnish comic artists: can you live on the comics? Can you pay your bills with the money you get from the editors?
Yeah, we are trying.
Well, if you're doing comics, I think it's probably the the question worldwide, like can you live on it? So so we're in a quite lucky position because we're doing workshops on the one and comics on the other hand. And one thing is we got a kind of stipendium, a grant from it's called Bundesstiftung zur Aufarbeitung der DDR-Diktatur. So it's a government institution who gives you money for projects who are dealing with the GDR, and it's kind of 1 year or more year projects, and you have to fill up some documents, and the entry form must be given in the end of August, and it will be decided in December if your project will be funded or not. So and the books we've done before worked quite well with the institution. And so they don't tell us what to do. We are quite very freely what we're doing in our topics, and it's very unique and rare in that way. Right now, a member of the Deutscher Comicverein, it's called. And last year there is also a grant with 16,000 euros, also as a kind of stipendium, only for comic artists from Berlin. And nearly 100 artists applied for that grant. So you see there's quite a lot of people working on comics. So it's like Berlin is like a comic city where a lot of artists are working, and so that's the way we try to fund our comics. You don't get a guarantee that your projects will be sponsored by the Stiftung, but I think right now we are both quite happy with the situation. Mm-hmm.
I think so.
And I also have to say, if we haven't been funded with the money from the Stiftung, we definitely couldn't have done the comics, because you have to live. You have to live on something, and the production time takes 1 year or longer.
Okay. Last question, because we have only 5 minutes. Do you have any tips for Finnish comic artists?
I thought perhaps you might have some tips for us.
Do you know some Finnish comic artists?
Yes. Right now, I also thanks to Dieter Schmitz. He wrote a nice book called "They're Crazy, Those Finns," I suppose, compared to the famous Asterix slogan. And Mauri Kunas, I think he's also playing in the band tonight. I liked very much, and also in looking at the work or the artists, I think there's a lot to discover and to explore. And one artist I really liked his work is Ville Tietjärväinen, and he's been doing the book Invisible Hands. I think it was a very big success here in Finland. We also chat by email, but he's working on another project, so he couldn't come. So I think it's always very nice to go to other countries and see what they're doing. So let's unite in a way.
For sure, always. And now, are there any questions from the audience to Susanne and Thomas? Mariana?
Can I use the microphone?
Yeah, for sure.
This is not a question, it's not a comment either. It's an advertisement. If you want to buy Susanne's and Thomas's comics, they are being sold by Arktinen Banaani downstairs, and they will be doing a signing after we finish this. So you can go, buy the book, and get it signed. So that was my non-question.
But you can tell it also in Finnish, in Fenno, Marianne, if someone not understands this.
Ja sama suomeksi, eli jos haluatte ostaa heidän sarjakuviaan, niin Arktisen Banaanin standilla tuolla alakerrasta löytyy, ja signeeraus alkaa heti kun täältä päästään. Eli käykää ostamassa sarjakuva, tulkaa hommaamaan siihen nimmari.
Okay, kiitos. Okay, Susanne and Thomas, one more question? Yes?
Yeah. So a question about your drawing style. So for I studied at the university and we've read a couple of your comics, and we, for example, noticed that you don't use all the round speech bubbles. So you make like square-like speech bubbles and so on. So do you have like a specific drawing style?
Specific drawing style? Well, with the Berlin comics and the Grenzfall, also Tunnel 57, it was like being very realistic, also to be true to the people, because the people are living and it's authentic. So we try to be as realistic as possible. Also because the books you could use as a tourist guide, especially the Berlin book. There are a lot of points, you know, where to go, which tram to use. So if you're going to Berlin, you probably might have the book under your arm and go from point to point. That might be interesting because it's also meant. The new book we're doing, it's totally different because it's more like in a funny style, and so it was not so important that the buildings look realistic and that stuff. Before we worked very close with the author, but the important thing was that the emotion is right. You know, how did she feel, and and we tried to figure that out. So it was nice to have this freedom, not to stick very close to a documentation, but to be more open and freely, and to submit that through the comics.
In the Berlin book, for example, the first story, it's about a girl can't finish school, and the material we had wasn't in this way as we did it in the book, because if you tell a story, you don't have to tell the story ABC. So we tell the story like C, interrupted, start with A again, come from A until we are at the point C, and finish with D. So so we did this in every story. We had this original material, but we don't tell the story as it came.
Okay. The time is over now. Thank you, Susanne. Thank you, Thomas, very much. And a good Tampere Kuplii for us all. Thank you very much. Kiitos.
Thank you very much.